Like in some cases, your data engineer might be all of it, right? Like your data engineer might be the one that's like modeling and architecting the data as well as building the pipeline, because you don't have kind of very like defined lines. And in other cases, it might be very, very well distinguished, where it's like, hey, you've got your ETL developer, you've got your data architect that kind of plans out from a high level, like how we're going to manage all this data, how it's going to look like. And then the ETL developer kind of is just going to push that data to match what they're kind of modeling.
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is powered by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Ben Rogojan. Ben is a data engineering solutions architect with expertise in data architecture and statistics. He focuses on developing end-to-end data solutions that help to take data from raw format into data products and analytics. He's delivered on projects for clients across healthcare, finance, SaaS, and technology, and he previously worked as a data engineer at Facebook, now Meta. He maintains a strong online presence, creating content for data engineers and those curious in entering data engineering career paths, and is known as the Seattle Data Guy online. In this episode, we talk about how Ben went from having aspirations of cooking fine food for a living to eventually working as a data engineer at Facebook. We also touch on the origin story of the Seattle Data Guy YouTube channel, coupled with his consulting, and about how data engineers can get out of their own way. I love the talk with Ben, and I'm really happy to share it with you. Ben, thank you so much for coming on the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast. You've done some pretty, incredible work as your alias, the Seattle Data Guy on YouTube. You've also had a pretty interesting career going from food to technology, working at Facebook Meta. I'm really happy to have you on to talk about your experiences, kind of on your own journey. And I'm certain that a lot of people can learn about, your own progression as well as about data engineering through this conversation. So again, welcome.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Ken, for having me on. I'm really excited to be on the Ken and Ben show.
I like it. Maybe we'll spin off a podcast called the Ken and Ben Show. It's got a good ring to it. So, the first thing I always ask people is, where did you first get interested in data? Was there just a pivotal moment, something cool that happened, or was it a slow progression over time?
Yeah, I definitely think it's kind of a combination of a slow progression plus, like catalyst point, right? Like I think some of the initial points of like me starting interest in data was like honestly just watching a show called Numbers, which is all about like people finding criminals through math, right? Like through different sort of like algorithms and basic stat essentially. So that was like the initial point of it. And then initially I was like thinking about how to apply that similarly to where I was working, because I was like working in the food industry, as you referenced earlier. And I was like, oh, I wonder if we can like calculate how many people show up per day based on the day of the week, weather, time of month, what's on the menu, things of that nature. And then eventually like even drilling down further and be like, oh, I wonder if you could predict like what they'd order based on some similar factors or something. So I think that was something that was where it started, and then eventually kind of came more to a head like when I started going back to college and was doing like an epidemiology course, and learned about the original Jon Snow and kind of the stuff that he did, some of the data viz that he put together, and how that actually like drove impact and caused him to kind of figure out where cholera was coming from. So I think that's kind of was like that catalyst point, right? Like up until that point, like data sure was interesting, but I think that was kind of that like, okay, I think this is a super interesting subject. I'm already learning programming, and now I'm learning more about data. Now I want to learn how to combine these things. And, I think I hadn't yet read the Harvard Review article about sexiest job being data scientist just yet. So I didn't know there was a term essentially for this, but eventually came out into the industry and found kind of that, yeah, like there's a lot of people already doing this. So yeah, that was kind of like my initial start through data.
Awesome. So how does someone go from working in the food industry? If I recall correctly, you did go to culinary school, correct? How did you make that transition from there to, working at like at Facebook or a big technology company? What does that progression look like? It seems like a lot had to happen for you to go that path.
Yeah, it was our I always laugh. It's the wisdom of my parents. Because at 16, I decided I was like, I want to work in the food industry. I want to be in fine dining. And so, in Washington, there's Running Start. And so I went and got into that program. Basically, you can do college early. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna do the culinary program. And my parents were like, yeah, that's cool, but maybe also get your business AA. So at the same time as I was like, getting my culinary degree, I got my business AA. And so then after about from 16 to 20, I worked in the culinary field and I saw my salary go from like $10 an hour to $15 an hour within like 4 years. And I was like, well, mathematically, this is not going to work out with the lifestyle I want. So, we need
Percent
to make a
increase
change.
though.
Yeah.
That's not a bad raise over time.
4 years of though, like, it's like mathematics. It depends if it's linear or if it's, going to keep going up at a 50% rate. So yeah, it would depend on how you look at it. But, yeah, I kind of saw, cause like, I was looking at people above me who were maybe 10 years older than me and they were making about the same as I was. So I was like, okay, if I'm gonna be 30 and making this much, the lifestyle that I want doesn't equate, right? Like, I think that's how I like to think about life. It's like, what do I want to do with my life? And it's like, okay, I'm gonna be working 60 hours a week and, making at most $40,000 to $50,000 a year, which is plenty of money, but it's definitely, working that much. And if that's like your career, like kind of pinnacle, it's going to be really hard if you want like a family and things like that. So I think that's what made me go back to school, and I did 2 more years around 20. So I finished at 22. So I wasn't that far behind, right? Like if anything, I was probably right on point for a lot of people. And yeah, kind of wrapped up around 22, 23. And yeah, then I got my first job at a hospital, kind of doing like data analysis.
Awesome. And so, it's funny. I had a very similar experience, not with food, but I after college, I tried to play golf professionally, right?
Oh, wow.
And there's this huge opportunity cost that you have to face. It's that, okay, how long does it take me to like start earning money or to like be successful at this? And if I don't become supremely successful at this, what's my earning potential? What are my career opportunities? And let's say I played golf for 5 years and went down that path. Honestly, the majority of my career options would be like selling insurance or going into real estate or doing a profession like that. And those are great professions, but they weren't exactly that interesting to me, right? I was like, oh, if I tried this and I don't think the upside is like probabilistically likely. Like I have to look at it in terms of expected value, and maybe not just expected value of earnings, but also expected value of happiness, right?
Yeah.
If I work in a profession that I work in now, right? Like I can play golf on the weekends. I can still enjoy the sport. I can go play in amateur tournaments. I can do this and that. But the amount of money and the quality of life that I experience is significantly higher doing this than if I had tried to go down the golf track as well. And so I think it's beautiful. Like you can still enjoy cooking, right? You can
Yeah.
still enjoy fine dining, maybe more from a consumer end.
Yeah.
But there's that, like, a lot of people think it's this or nothing, and it's like, well, for better or for worse, I've been able to do like everything outside of playing in professional golf tournaments. I've been able to have all of the golf experiences that I've ever would have wanted to have and more through the work that I do now.
Yeah.
And so like that's kind of an exciting thing, is that through data, through some of these other professions, there are so many opportunities available to you. So going back to your story about working in, I said, the hospital, how does that transition, or where do you get the seed planted that you want to work at a larger tech company? And also, what was the nature of that work? Was it data science, data analytics, data engineering? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, so I was working at a hospital, and basically, like, kind of in like, I was working on a financial analyst team, so like everyone else was basically working with Excel. But and before when I kind of jumped on, there was a more senior kind of like data analyst, whatever you want to call them, that was like super technical. They were more of a programmer, honestly. They just kind of came into this role, and they were kind of already working on like a data warehouse and like doing all this other kind of dashboard building and website building and all these projects. And so, I kind of came on as an intern initially to kind of like help that other person, which of course, like I think plenty of people have happened. That person left like 2 weeks later. So like everything was like, all right, like you're the only technical person on this team, so you get to learn all of this stuff. And so yeah, so like I think like I don't, I think I always kind of wanted to work like at a FAANG. I think most people like, right, like you want to work at one of the like big tech companies, whether it's like Airbnb, Spotify, a FAANG. Like there's always going to be a point of pride that you got there at the very least, right? Like you got through the interview. So I think if you ask why I did that, it's like, well, who doesn't want to work at a larger tech company, right? Like just to see what it's like, right? Like you want to see like, okay, what do they do? Is it different? Is it the same? Like, is it better? Is it worse? so you can kind of understand that. But yeah, so like working through kind of that hospital. Eventually started working at a healthcare startup from there, like because I already kind of had a general idea of some healthcare data, and so this healthcare startup thought, why not try out this kid? So I started doing work at a healthcare startup and working for them, and that's where I really like to say I cut my teeth in terms of like learning more about kind of data engineering and like system design and things of that nature, because like basically when I started working at this healthcare startup, initially it was more like an operational kind of role where I was just kind of loading data. Like they had some commands you'd run and just make sure that it loaded correctly into the database and things of that nature. But eventually I was like, okay, we're doing the same commands over and over again. Maybe we can automate this. So like I kind of like built this website that was completely overkill. Like there's no need to do what I did, but I like did it and like, oh yeah, you can just press this button now and it'll just run the file. Like it'll find the file and run it automatically. And I kind of showed that off to my director of engineering at the time, and she, I think, in her wisdom, was like, okay, maybe this is overkill, but clearly you can develop and do a lot more than just operationally manage these kind of file loads. So then she kind of let me kind of do a lot more development, and that kind of, I think, spurred on a lot more interest in that area as well. And then eventually, I was trying to interview around after about whatever 2.5 years, because I was like, okay, now I'd like to kind of take another shot at, your Amazons, your Facebooks, and whatnot. And lo and behold, Facebook did end up giving me an interview, and I actually went through two different ones and passed one, didn't pass the other, but that's kind of, I think, how it goes for interviews. And then they offered me a job, so that was kind of where I ended up.
That's awesome. Well, I think that that's a really important point, is that a lot of people who I've talked to that do work at the FAANG companies, one of my friends, he applied to LinkedIn 4 times before he got his first job there, right? It's not uncommon to repeatedly apply. Like a long time ago, I applied to Facebook when it was Facebook and I got rejected. And, I decided not to apply again. But like there is plenty of opportunities, and recruiters reach out to me from Facebook still, right? And it's not like just because one opportunity, you don't just miss an opportunity to work with a lot of these companies unless you do something like super racist in the interview and they won't ever call you back, right? um but something else I wanted to kind of drill into is around the difference between data engineering, or like the data infrastructure at a startup versus one of these big companies, and some of the things that you learn there. So in a video I made recently, which I believe you've seen, is like, why is data engineering so hot right now? One of the ideas is that, like, a lot of these big tech companies, they've built really good data infrastructure. They would not be able to succeed at what they do without the data infrastructure that they built, because their entire businesses are built almost primarily on data, right?
Yeah.
um, Whereas in a startup, a lot of companies, they either have the idea first, or and they're like having to build out the infrastructure, or they've built or they are building the infrastructure out with the future in mind. But you're still at a very different place, right? You have to build the infrastructure rather than work in this ecosystem that's already like very well curated for the problem you're trying to solve. um, was there some like dichotomy there? Like what new skills did you have to learn working at a big company versus a startup? um, yeah, like what were those two experiences like, and how did they differ?
Yeah, I mean, so working at the startup that I worked at, we definitely were using like, I'd say, a very bare bones approach to data engineering, right? And in a way, like that's something that I'd almost agree with. Like you kind of mentioned earlier, like oh, some startups like look at all the new tools and they want to use all of that, but oftentimes they fail to ask questions like, do I need all that? So in my case for this startup, like we were honestly using pretty simplistic ways to get data to get processed. We knew what our problem was, or we knew what our kind of thing was. We really only processed data about once a month, or like we had like a report that was due every month that we are kind of like selling out. And so there was tons of companies that we had to do it for, but that was the one thing. So it's very batch focused. You don't need, like, because it doesn't have a huge amount of dependencies, you could kind of run like it into 3 chunks on its own. Um, and so that kind of led us not need a lot of fancy tools, right? Like we didn't need Airflow. We didn't need all these kind of extra layers, because it's like, well, it's really just, these SQL scripts that need to get run, an initial load script, and that's about it. And then we just used like SQL Server. So it was pretty straightforward in that regard. Like it wasn't super complex. but that, I think that's kind of normal. In some ways, it like, because we also built out like 2 products while I was there, so that required a lot of like system design thinking about dependencies a little more deliberately. So like thinking about what needs to run before what and things of that nature, and kind of designing the system for the different use cases that we wanted to kind of provide at the end with this data product. Because it was much more of like a data product company than it was anything else. It was like we had kind of some end products that we were developing. Whereas Facebook, they have a mature data ecosystem. They have a lot of the stuff ready to go, like everything from how you're version controlling your system or your data, or not your data, your code and your pipelines, to the pipelines themselves, right? Like they're using Data Swarm, which is similar to Airflow, to every other layer is already kind of there, right? Like it's already there, it already exists. You're really just coming in and kind of working within the system they've already developed. So for some people, I think they don't necessarily like the fact that maybe it is to that state. But for me, I think it makes the most sense, like, right, like having a fully matured system and not having to do a lot of like the data infra that's around that system, because that's so time consuming, is how you're going to move fast when it comes to getting to data insights quickly, right? Like if you're having to spend 2 weeks just setting up your pipeline infrastructure and not even getting to the actual pipeline, people aren't going to get to their insights for a long time. So I think that's one of the kind of differences. Like they're already mature, they already have kind of systems in place. There are always little improvements to be made, but overall, I think they have a system that works. And I think you brought that up earlier. They've built it forever ago, right? Like they're the people that built Presto and Hive because they realized we needed something more than just what we had in for options. And it's similar to say about Google and BigQuery or Amazon and Redshift. They knew we needed better data infrastructure, so they built it. So they've just built a lot of that stuff already internally, and that can be a lot less fun for some people because they might want to like start using some of the fun stuff that exists outside. But it can also make a lot of sense if you understand from like a business operation standpoint. It's like, hey, we need to start delivering data as fast as possible. We don't need to spend tons of time, building up all this stuff.
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP. HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z4 workstation. I really love that the Z line can come standard with Linux, and they also can be configured with the data science software stack. With the software stack, you can get right into the work of doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show.
Yeah, I mean that makes a ton of sense to me. Something that always comes up in my mind. I mean, I think I talk about this quite a bit within the broader data science domain, but what are some of the specific use cases of data engineering versus, or like what a data engineer does versus what like a data architect does? And I think historically, like even within like the data manipulation or database administration domain, there was a lot more clarity around what these roles did. And now that quote unquote data engineer has been introduced as a term, that's sort of like added confusion to the mix. I might be wrong about that, but like, can you explain to me about like the different roles within like sort of like the data engineering, data manipulation sphere?
Yeah, I mean, like, so I think, a lot of it's, I think, become morphed and changed over the last, whatever, few decades, right? Like, because before it was like, I think you had more distinguishable pieces at some point where there was like, this is an ETL developer, this is a data architect, this is, different kind of roles.
Database admin, we have, yeah.
Yeah. And they all played very distinct roles, but I think, we've kind of seen some morphing and depending on the company you work at, like in some cases, your data engineer might be all of it, right? Like your data engineer might be the one that's like modeling and architecting the data as well as building the pipeline because you don't have kind of very like defined lines. And in other cases, it might be very, very well distinguished where it's like, hey, you've got your ETL developer, you've got your data architect that kind of plans out from a high level, like how we're going to manage all this data, how it's going to look like. And then the ETL developer kind of is just going to push that data to match what they're kind of modeling. Because, right, like they're trying to basically set up the data to match all the use cases that people are going to like ask questions on, because there's tons of use cases that come up. And if you don't manage your data correctly, sometimes you can't join across the different tables because you didn't think like, oh, there needs to be a relationship here, but you didn't set it up. I always like to give the example of like, imagine you like are doing some sort of data warehouse. You have like your like fact table for order line items. You've got your menu, and then you've got your kind of like restaurant as kind of like dimension tables. But if I were to ask you the question, like, okay, well, what items aren't ordered? You can't answer it, because with those three tables, if there isn't a key that somehow tells you what item that is connected to what restaurant, and the only place you can connect it to is that fact table, you can only tell me what has been ordered, and you can't say what hasn't, because you don't know where those items go if you don't have a key across or some sort of bridge table or something that creates a relationship one way or the other. So it just causes that kind of issue. And so I think, that's kind of the way that I think a lot of data architects have been used. Like, how are you going to plan out kind of how that data is managed, so that we can answer all of our use cases? How are we going to track dimension or slowly changing dimensions, like things that change over time? Because that's another issue. If it's not tracked, it's like, okay, I want a report that tells me the number of even users per city that we manage. And if you only have like an update statement, right? Like, okay, user A is now in New York, but they were in whatever, Cincinnati last year, but you don't know that they were in Cincinnati last year because you just updated that table to say like, okay, they're now in New York. You've kind of lost information, and now you can't properly report. So managing things like that, I think, is more on that data architect, data modeler role. And then on the other side, for ETL developer, it's kind of piping that data into those tables correctly. But I think a lot of that's been merged sometimes into data engineer, depending. I think at larger, more traditional companies, they have, I think, still have those things a little more separated. But I think in some companies, they just want it to move faster. So they're like, well, if we have this in one person, they can manage the whole pipeline, and then we don't have to spend as much time, doing as much big architecture. And I think that's another thing, is like a lot of people are switching away from like doing this like EDW, like as like one central place, and like maybe doing some more like decentralization there as well. It just depends on how you've set up your kind of company as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, at least for me, when I was first learning about any of the data engineering type work, I was really astounded by how much nuance there is. And just like with data science, how much it differs by company, and tools used, and like the strategy that you're approaching it with, and the amount of ad hocness there are to tasks, or like structure and planning around them. Um, you know, Something I would ask is like, do you think data engineering can be done in an ad hoc way, or is it something that like it really lends itself to like planning and strategy? I mean, some of the ETL stuff, like, probably yes, but like at a broader level, I mean, do you need structure on this? Or can some companies get away with like, hey, we're using a NoSQL database for this, it's going to be relatively unstructured, and we'll structure when we need it?
I mean, I think you're always going to need to take the time to plan. It's just unavoidable to some degree. Like, at least building those core layers. Like, I always like to think of data, right? Like, you try to build kind of this like pull from your core systems, create some core layer of data that's like, this is your truth, so to speak. It's rarely like no one ever fully gets to like perfect source of truth, but that destination of trying to constantly get to source of truth. So you kind of treat this as your core layer, the closest thing you can get to a source of truth. It's kind of your finest grain you can get to, and then from there people can build on top of that. I think that's the place that takes the most planning. I think the layers on top of that, maybe you can start getting less and less planning as you go along, right? Like, you've got ad hoc requests that come in, and maybe you just build that query for somebody, or you're just trying to see if something's worth kind of building. But I think for that core layer, I think there's an unavoidable amount of planning, especially as companies become more complex with their data sources, right? More data sources, which are they're even further integrated than they've ever been, right? Your Workday talks to your Salesforce, talks to all of these other things, causes the risk for a lot of issues in terms of like pulling the same information from multiple sources that is not synced at the correct time. So now you've got people reporting on the same field, but from different sources. And thus, when you report on that, well, maybe this wasn't synced, and you're slightly off. So the number of people that are under a person is wrong because you were off by a day from when you pulled. So I think that's why there's always planning involved, because you have to tell, well, where's this data coming from? What's going to be the source of truth for this field? Is this the actual source of truth for this field, or is this getting pulled from a different table? So I think a lot of that will always take a little more time. And yeah, you can apply some, as much as people hate it, like agile approaches to it, to try to like iterate faster so that you're not taking as long to get to the data that you need right now. But I think over over a long period of time, you're going to constantly be refactoring it. So it's going to take time one way or the other. Either you're going to be taking time refactoring it because you need to constantly change it over time, or you're spending a ton of time doing analysis up front to see if this matches all the use cases.
Fascinating. And so I guess if we're thinking about like ad hoc tasks, or we're thinking about like the systems that we're putting into place, how should data engineering, do you think, interface with like a data analyst or data scientist? Like what does the handoff look like in an effective organization? And that's probably an impossible question to answer in like one solid way, but like, do you have a preferred method, or what do you think makes the most sense from what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, it like you said, there's no solid answer here, mostly because it's going to depend on your team's skill sets, right? Like to say like, oh, I want my analyst to write queries is assuming that all your analysts can write queries, which is true in some cases at some companies and is not true in other companies. I think this is a gap we continue to try to jump over, right? Like. That's like the whole I'm something forgetting, like not like Power BI, but not like Power BI, but like Power Query, right? Like in Excel, right? Like if you've ever used Power Query, that's kind of the thing. Like, can we create a GUI version of joining tables so that an analyst doesn't have to write a query to pull it into Excel, right? That's kind of their goal there. Is like, how do we remove the data engineer or someone who is a little more technical from this picture so that they can get to that data quickly. I think obviously in a perfect world, it'd be nice if data engineers could like focus more on just creating those core layers of data, maybe a few analytical layers as well, and some like key KPIs, and then ad hoc queries was always taken care of by like analysts. Like that would be like I imagine a better world where we can kind of all focus. Obviously now you might have heard the term analytics engineer, and that's kind of a layer in between even there, where they might be doing that more. The data engineers might be focusing more on the core data layers. After that, an analytics engineer might come in and then kind of create some more of the aggregate tables, maybe some more of the complex dimensions or something that requires a little more logic development. That way they can kind of be more specialized. But that's if you have the team members, and oftentimes I find that data engineers tend to split themselves anyways into a natural grouping of people that like doing more coding, and then people that like doing maybe a little more SQL and creating a lot more of that business logic. So that, like you said, there's not a perfect mix. I think often that what works is if you can create that core layer with data engineers, and then figure out what the gap is from there, right? Like if you need your data engineers to kind of develop the queries themselves because you don't have analysts that are capable of writing SQL, then that's what's going to happen. If you have analysts that can write SQL, they can do a lot more of that ad hoc work, maybe even try to take some attempts at some more complex business logic. But at the end of the day, I think it generally will still kind of fall into either an analytics engineer or a data engineer to kind of like just solidify it and productionize it, and then kind of work from there. I think at the end of the day, like analysts and data engineers are just different in mentalities of what we're trying to do. Data engineers, I think, try to build things that are going to be here for a long time. Analysts often just want to answer questions, and that answering questions is sometimes not permissible if you keep having to do like version control and all these other different kind of extra steps. And you're just like, I just have this ad hoc analysis. I don't want to spend 3 days just to write one query because I have to do version control every time, and I'm just trying to answer this quick question for my boss that we're never going to use again. So yeah.
It's funny. I remember quite a few times where like I would just write my own queries, and then one of the data engineers would be like, why'd you use this column? Why'd you use this column? Like, these aren't useful. And I'm like, why'd you put it in the database if we shouldn't be using it? Like, and so there was this was not a common occurrence where we'd, have those issues, but it's like, part of me is like seeing an inefficiency in how I would work, is that like, okay, maybe it's better in some organizations if data engineers just do it, if like the infrastructure with what we're supposed to be querying isn't clean enough for us to be like using it. And then in other places where like data engineers are focusing really heavily on like building the proper infrastructure, like like data scientists and data analysts should be doing as many, the majority of the querying if it's light stuff or dashboarding or whatever it might be. But that's something that I've seen in a couple organizations now, is it's like I don't want to piss off the data engineers by like wasting their time because I'm perfectly capable of writing a query. But at the same time, there's been circumstances where when I've written the query, it was not correct, or it was not correct because of not the SQL, but it was not correct because of like the infrastructure we're using and some of the semantics there. And so I think that's like where a good manager can make a huge difference, or a project manager or whatever it might be, or that analytics engineer that you described. It sounds like a perfect fit for there. I wish I had one of those back back a couple of years ago.
Yeah. No, and it's always this gap, right? Like data, like even the underlying data changes so quickly that, data engineers might not have time to like be like, oh, we should remove this column. But there are consequences to doing that. So it's like sometimes we're like, maybe we'll do it later. And obviously I think like long term the goal is to always kind of try to remove things, and everything in that core layer should only be accurate information that is usable. But I think sometimes between time constraints and everything, that doesn't always get done. And I think that's a constant problem, everywhere. There's never enough people, especially when it comes to like data engineers, and there's always more questions that the business asks. So yeah, trying to figure out a way to like manage that is, I think people are trying to do that with like projects like Data Hub, where it's a kind of a place you can kind of start searching for columns and things like that, or tables that might exist, and get a lot of metadata about it. Which then maybe you can put something into that like metadata store that says like, oh, this is a deprecated field. At the very least, like you could do that. That was something we had at Facebook, but where you could like mark a field as deprecated. So maybe you didn't want to remove it because removing it means maybe breaking 30 other pipelines. But you can put this deprecated thing, and then like if you've got a really fancy SQL linter, it'll yell at you and be like, "Oh, actually, this field's deprecated. Don't even use it." But that's a very not everyone's got that. So
The company I was working at is more on the startup-y side, and like the schemas and all of that stuff. It wasn't, a lot of the metadata associated with that was not well built out, and so I was like, all right, that's like a function of where additional layers of structure I think could create a lot of value. Um, you know, I want to change gears a little bit. Something that I think is pretty fascinating about you is, you were able to land one of these big tech jobs, but now you've left that tech job and have been working in consulting. You also do quite a lot of content creation, blogging, YouTube videos, things along those lines. I'd love to learn where that sort of started and what lessons you learned from that. And if I recall correctly, your sort of blogging, your content creation journey started still with food. If yeah.
Good memory. Yes, I had a blog. I think when I don't know why I did it. I think I just had free time, right? Like you get out of college and you're like, I have time. I don't have to do homework anymore, so let's go do something. So yeah, I like put together like a website there and started writing about like food that I was eating, that I enjoyed, and yeah, because I was like, I still wanted to, I think, be a little more attached to food, because as you when you did I did commit a decent amount of my life at that point to food, so it was like, oh man, I'm kind of sad that I'm leaving this, but yeah, it was like one way to kind of stay connected. So yeah, that's where blogging started. As far as consulting goes, honestly, I had someone who reached out to me after like we'd worked together, and they wanted some help on a project. It was like converting an Access database to SQL Server database, and so they could do some analytics for a company. So I kind of just set up an LLC for that. I don't remember why I came up with Seattle Data Guy, but I did. And then another friend asked something very similar, where they asked like, yeah, hey, can you help us out on a project as well? And they were very into like kind of doing social media analytics, and like that was kind of their goal. So basically, like with that came like, I was already blogging for my site. Then I learned about Medium, so I started writing on Medium. So I started just putting out tons of content there, and have been putting out content for a little bit. And I think this year I started to notice that like I kind of missed the boat on YouTube. I was like, oh man, I should have started back in like April, apparently, because that does seem to be there seems to be an interesting influx around that time. I think I recall you noted that as well, right? Like somewhere in that time we were all home, we had the free time, and a lot of us, we were
Everyone
like
wanted to learn.
we wanted to figure it out. Everyone wanted to learn from the side of like watching, but like also creators had time as well, right? Like suddenly you were like home, and it's like, oh, I like 30 minutes, like put together a video, like, okay, yeah, I can do that. And, I don't have this traffic that I have to go through, so I can put together a video. So yeah, there's like this interesting flux of like data and programming YouTubers that came around, I think in that wave. You've probably, I think you've had a few of them on here, like Tina Huang and a few of the others. But yeah, I think they all started somewhere in that range, if I recall. So that was something that I was like, I think this year in June, I was like, oh man, I should have started way long ago. But I was like, all right, let's finally start this. Let's just try this. And just started filming in like using my computer camera and in the corner of my kitchen. And I was like, okay, I got a decent amount of views. Let's try improving this a little bit. Still have not bought a 4K camera, but my phone is currently working fine. So yeah,
Well,
that's
technically your
that's
phone is a
content
4K
side.
camera.
What?
Technically your phone is a 4K camera.
Oh, is it? Well, I see. I wouldn't even know because I like this is not my area of concern.
Well, if you need any camera recommendations, I've got you.
Perfect.
Awesome. And so, it's interesting to see how that's evolved. Obviously, I'll link all of your content sources in the description below. So anyone interested, please check those out. Um, you know, what is the nature of a lot of the content you're producing? I know you have a lot of information about data engineering in particular. Can you give us sort of like a spark notes of, some of the highlight videos that you'd recommend people starting with to just get started out understanding you as well as the data engineering domain?
Yeah, so I think a lot of my content currently is definitely around like the intro data engineer, like what is it, do you want to become it, and how do you become it concepts. So that's been a lot of my focus early on. So like one popular video is like why you shouldn't become a data scientist but become a data engineer, which is mostly just pointed at like why someone might prefer data engineering. It's not to say one or the other is better, but merely why sometimes people do switch, right? Like, and I've seen people switch both ways, right? Like some people start as data engineers and like, no, I like data science, and some people go the other way, right? Like I think who was it that you had on recently that did that? Do you
I know
recall?
Sundus did.
Sundus, yes.
Yeah.
So she went data engineer to data science, and then if I think you've talked to Joe Rise as well, and he's gone data science to data engineer or data infrastructure, and so I think people try to figure out like where do they fit, and if you've got some programming and some knowledge of stat, you can kind of toggle between both for a little bit until you find the one you enjoy. It just depends on what you prefer doing. So I think that was kind of one that's a decent video. It's got decent views. Not too many downvotes, as much as no one can tell.
No one can tell anymore.
No,
Yeah.
no one can tell. Well, no, we can tell. You guys hurt our feelings with every downvote.
No, I encourage downvotes they're counted the same in the YouTube algorithm.
Oh, really?
Which is weirdly enough. So they're just both counted. Upvotes and downvotes are counted as engagement. And people like YouTube, the algorithm is designed to optimize for engagement and watch time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like this weird paradoxical thing where stuff that gets like even like super downvoted, it was still getting showed a lot because like
it's engagement. Engagement
exactly.
is engagement. Yeah.
It's a weird thing.
I don't know if you saw this guy. I don't remember what his YouTube channel was. He's like, oh, I hacked the YouTube algorithm. And his video has like 5 million views. And basically what he did was he sped up his video. It's only 30 seconds or 25 seconds. And he sped it up to like ×4. And then he tells you before you start to put it to ×0.25 as you run it. So it runs at normal speed. And so that causes the YouTube doesn't understand that you've still only watched 100% of the video. It thinks you've watched 400% of the video if you watch the whole thing. And so basically he showed how basically by doing that he got 4 million views, because all of his other videos don't have that many. But it was very, very interesting in terms of like watch time. It's like you can kind of, if you can figure out a way to game that thing, in theory, I guess you can get tons of views.
Well, that's the thing. If people watch a video multiple times, you bump watch time. And I'm experimenting with some stuff like that. I'd love to do something at the end of each of my videos that's sort of like a scavenger hunt or like a, did you notice? And so people go back through and it's like fun for them, right? It's not, if they don't want to, they don't have to. But to me, that there's unique ways that you can optimize for an algorithm while still not detracting from the experience of the individual viewers. And obviously his didn't, right? You switch the toggle from to slow it down and it works perfect. But I also think that it's a little bit disappointing that the YouTube algorithm optimizes in the way that it does. I mean, it's definitely not optimized for well-being. It's optimized for people to just go down rabbit holes and watch as much content as possible. And like I am subject to it, right? Like we have to make content that that we think will be interesting. And that's a trade-off I think you have to make when you focus on one platform in particular. And, that's one of the reasons why I like, LinkedIn. I like these other platforms as well, is that I can tell different stories based on the different platforms that we're a part of.
Yeah.
I go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, okay. We've been on this marketing kind of spiel for a
Yeah.
little bit, so happy to switch.
I would love to hear a little bit more about the consulting, and obviously it's going well enough that you felt comfortable leaving your job at Facebook Meta. What has that journey been like for you, and what are some of the opportunities, but also the challenges with going sort of on your own like that?
Yeah, I mean, so I had a consulting company for a long time, being like I think like 4 or 5 years, and like I would take like mini little projects here and there, put out content. And I think this year there was just a lot of like things that came to a head where it was like, I just started putting out more content, started I think synergizing more platforms. You just referenced LinkedIn, so like trying to like really get like everything to go across everything, because right now it's like if one of my pieces of content blows up, I see it impact almost everything, right? Like it's like, oh, I had a YouTube video blow up. Well, now my website's visited more. Now my newsletters visit. I get 100 new signups for my newsletter in that day. So it's just all kind of flywheeling at this point from a content standpoint. Because again, I've been building it for the last 5 years on different platforms and on just trying to make it for each platform, right? Like that's always the hard part, make each kind of piece of content for each platform. But yeah, so that's started to flywheel. Suddenly I forget where I was going. In terms of like consulting, yeah. So from a content that started to flywheel, which also led to more like engagements consulting wise. So I think that's also changed. Is like I've got a lot more requests for a proposal, and then the other big thing that I changed this year is like how I would deal with projects. Like before, I think I would be very open and kind of take any project almost like it's like, oh, it's $500, $1,000 a month, which obviously it's great to have an extra $1,000 a month, but then when you look at your Facebook salary, you're like, wait, I would need like 40, a ridiculous amount of these projects to manage a similar salary. Not to mention, I'm not going to have health insurance and all these other issues, and I can't manage 20 to 40 projects, in my brain, even if it's only like 3 hours per project. It's just, you take up a certain amount of memory per per project, regardless. It's just a default. So yeah, I think switching that up as well, and making sure I'm focusing on projects that are more impactful for a business, and marketing more towards that, even with my content, and trying to hit those kind of concepts has been very helpful. So that's kind of been the switch. It's like, okay, how do I reposition myself to make sure I'm being very impactful at a business, so that way I can charge accordingly, right? Like I want to provide the value, but in order to provide the value, you have to kind of market towards the problem you're trying to solve. So I think that also helped. Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunity. Like there's a lot of opportunity in especially the data engineering space, right? Data science. I know everyone says data engineering is hot right now, and I think in some ways it is, right? Like we're seeing billions of dollars go into funding for data engineering systems like Fivetran, and Snowflake's billions of dollars of stock valuation and all of that. But I think data engineering is just not as enticing or as exciting, right? Like it is kind of more of the plumbing. We're just doing the infrastructure, and for some people, I don't think it's as sexy. But that means there's a ton of opportunity for solving this problem. And if you've been around a lot and work with different tools, work with different solutions, kind of get how things work from a high level, and not just from like, oh, someone told me to do some solution, so I put it in. But like you can kind of come in and be like, hey, I'm going to implement this whole thing for you, right? I'm not just going to implement one piece. I'm going to do all of it. There's a lot of value you can add, and that's really what I've been trying to focus on. And that's something like, honestly, if you want to talk about like skills you learn at Facebook, it's like that's the mentality you start developing. It's like, what project can I do that's the most impactful and that requires the least amount of my time, right? Because it's like I have to make sure I look really good at the end of the half. And if I'm doing like 10 projects, but all of them are kind of baby impacts, it's not, one person did one project, and that one project got them a promotion, and this 10 projects didn't even get me a promotion. So you just start thinking about that and like, okay, what really drives value to business? So yeah,
Well,
that's kind of what changed.
in this case, it's a lot more clear cut. It's like what drives revenue to your pocket, like, which I think is
Yes, obviously
it's
for me,
even
I see
more
that.
clear cut.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's and it's obviously I'm trying to remember, was it Vin who was talking about like the different salary, or like different ways engineers can kind of charge, like data scientists can charge for what they do consulting wise. And it's like, yeah, there's definitely a lot you can, if you're good at consulting, you can charge a decent amount, because what people are expecting is not a pair of hands, or at least not only a pair of hands. But someone who comes with the experience, the knowledge, should do a lot more, right? Like they want you to come in. All right, like a normal worker, you come in, you spend the first 2 weeks getting up to speed. Maybe you do a few tasks after that, and it's a very slow process. But oftentimes when they hire a consultant, it's like, hey, week one, you got to start already almost delivering something. It doesn't have to be the actual thing, but like start showing how you're going to deliver value day one. And I think it's a very different experience, and that just takes time to figure out how to do.
How is it managing projects by yourself, or have you hired anyone? Like, what does that process look like? I mean, I think for me, like technically I work in consulting also, and one of the biggest challenges is that the bigger, like more high profile clients that we bring on, the more people we need to bring on, because I simply cannot handle all of the work. And you need to find people with like the specific skill set, and you have to find people that are like, especially when you're small, like you have to find people that are willing to work potentially like without benefits, or like those types of things. And are you limited by just being, by yourself? Like, how do you make that step to hiring people or bringing people on? Maybe you haven't thought that far ahead, maybe you have, but I'm interested in that progression, kind of selfishly as well.
Yeah, of course. So I did experiment with hiring kind of like an intern earlier this year, and it's data engineers are definitely hard to hire for an interning role, just because that skill is not something taught in school at all, right? At least data science has like something of a semblance of courses, I think, moreover, even in schools, right? There's like master's degrees in data science these days, so at least they have some ideas that the tools are going to use. So like, for example, I hired someone that was more of a data science background, and then I remember I asked them to do a pipeline, and I provided way too much ambiguity, and they came around and gave me a Jupyter notebook, and I was like, you know what? That's on me. This is on me. I definitely should have seen this coming. Asking a data scientist to build a pipeline like this, that's what I would have done. I was like, oh, just here it is. Here's the pipeline. It's like, okay. But yeah, so I'm still figuring out how to do that best. I do have people that I work with that are more on the like contracting side of work, because you do tend to need to find people that are very like somewhat already pretty skilled. I think obviously everyone wants to hire a more skilled person, but I think in particular with data engineering, it is hard to get people to have the right skill set. I think Joe's doing, mentioned him earlier, Joe Rice. I think he's kind of getting up more of a system to get people to that right level. But yeah, you kind of have to set up a process to teach people, especially if you want to bring them from an interning level, or even a beginner junior level to a more advanced level. It's like you kind of have to be responsible for that, because there's not a lot of context on how to become a data engineer. It's really just piecing together things and then relearning things because you learned it wrong because it was from some blog article from 20 years ago, and now we're doing everything completely different. So yeah, it is definitely a challenge, because I think the best way you can do it is like develop a process. That's honestly what I tell people is Facebook and any big tech company superpower is they have a process to create really good like programmers, data engineers, data scientists, right? Like they've developed that, right? They know how to drive the right incentives that people become that. Whereas most companies that you hire a data scientist, and if there's only two of you, there's no process around best practices, right? Because it's like the one before you was some PhD who maybe has some experience, but maybe not that much, specifically in data science. And so there's like a lack of best practices, and so I think that's an interesting next step for me, is like trying to create some sort of program to like onboard someone and immediately get them to a point that I need them to be at.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, at least for me, I really enjoy those types of struggles, or enjoy
Yeah.
that like process of building. I mean, it's a headache, but it's a lot of fun building out infrastructure for like my YouTube channel and the community and like editors and those types of things, right? Um, you know, uh, I'll be fairly direct. I'm interested in like your thought process for leaving a big FAANG company, and to do consulting, or to do this other approach. What are the main motivators for that? I mean, I would imagine like financially there you'd probably have to be making similar, at least, to make that transition. But is it that the freedom that you enjoy, is the idea that you have more control over your own destiny? What are the things that really appeal to you to make that next step, and transition away? I mean, I guess you can always go back, right? Like there's nothing that really prevents that. But I'm just genuinely interested in kind of your thought process around that.
Yeah, no, I think some of them you've hit on the head. I think one, I can always go back. I think that was the biggest fear. It's like, I almost feel like they make interviews so hard so we don't want to leave, right? Like, it's like you had to go through this process, you don't want to go through it again. But part of me is like, you know what, I'll figure that out like when that happens. I think that's part of it. I think another part is like, yeah, financially, in theory, this could and could not be more lucrative, right? Like when you balance it all out, it might just end up being the same at the end of the day. Like I've definitely seen people who become very high level engineers at Facebook, and there's articles about them making $1 million a year. So it's like, it's hard to beat that number, consulting wise, right? Like you'd have to do tons of hours. But I feel like that also might be a smaller, like there's a very small group of people that do that well. That was like an an E8 or E7, which is like, I think technically the tech lead, being a tech lead was like E5 or E6. So imagine like several levels above that to make that salary. So I think most people probably cap out at that like E5, E6. So I'm like, okay, I think it's possible for me to make that salary consulting. I think the other thing is I really do want to make more content. I think that's going to be a huge driver. I think that's going to be something that's a little more scalable. And I think that's my biggest goal. I think my biggest goal long term is figuring out how to become more scalable as a person, as whether it's content, whether it's a product, whether it's, consulting and having more people under, working with me. I think that's like my long term goal, like both from a standpoint of like whatever you want to call it, financial freedom, and just in terms of like being impactful. It's like at a certain point, my skill set as a person hits a wall, and I need to figure out how to get beyond that. And that's either through hiring people, through building something that is scalable, content. YouTube I think is like one of those cheat codes where it's like, yeah, you want something scalable, make a decent YouTube channel. Like you can impact so many people with 30 minutes of work, maybe more than 30 minutes, but you get my point. It's like your 8-minute video that you spent an hour or two prepping for, maybe 8 hours if it's really well researched, and then you paid someone else to hopefully edit it if you're me, because I do not have time. But yeah, and then you impact 2,000 people, and that's really cool. Or maybe if you do a good video, 100,000 people or 1 million people. And yeah, I think that's kind of that next step, right? It's like, okay, how do I just become scalable from an impact standpoint? Because that's what drives value to people, and that's interesting to me. So
yeah, I've had very similar conversations with myself. I taught a university course this past year, right? And I sit there and I teach 3 hours of content once a week to 30 students, right? Those same 30 students over the course of a whole semester. If I make a YouTube video, if I make an online course, I can reach 50,000, 100,000 people with literally less effort, because I don't have to go through and teach it. I can teach at my own pace, do whatever. And I think that that's like a really important thing, is to say, hey, how do I get more from the hours that I put in, or how do I like have control over the hours that I put in as well? Yeah. So I think that that's a really good note to end on. What are you working on now? How can people get in contact with you? How can they find out more about you? Please let everyone know.
Yeah, what I'm working on now, I mean, obviously content. I do want to put together some stuff that's a little more like helping people think mentally about data engineering, like not just tool based. I think some people approach learning data engineering from a tool based approach. I think I do have some stuff that I'd like to put out videos on that are a little more like high level. It's like, okay, when you develop a data pipeline, what are we thinking about, right? Regardless of tools, agnostic of that, like how do we really think about it? What are kind of the key points? So that's kind of one thing. Consulting obviously is another thing, and figuring out how to continue to grow that is the other big thing for me internally. Yeah, I think those are kind of the key areas. I'd like to read more. That's something I'm hoping to do more this year. I didn't get to read much last year, so I'm like, I feel a little bit drained. Sometimes you need to drink from a well and not just pour out information. You get a little bit, you start getting stale. So you need to kind of refresh yourself. So yeah, I think that's something I'd really like to do this year as well. But yeah, if anyone wants to contact me, you can find me under Seattle Data Guy on most platforms. So ping me, LinkedIn me, message me, whatever, on whatever platform. And yeah, thanks so much for all your time.
Yeah, of course. You too. I'll make sure to have all of those links below in the description as well. Until next time.
Yep. Thank you.